Hello, welcome back to this little corner of the internet where I tell you true crime stories. My name's Yinka, in case this is our first time meeting. It's nice to meet you. I never know how to begin these things. This week's case that I'm covering is a big one. I really struggled with the research and getting it all into a 10-minute script, so hopefully it's one that you find interesting and informative. Before we begin, we're almost at 6k subscribers. Being honest, right, I try to keep this hobby, this channel, away from the whole chasing views, away from the whole hundreds and thousands and all of that sort of stuff, because it is just something that I enjoy. But you know, progress and growth are growth and progress, and 6,000 subscribers is pretty cool. If you like what I do here, then subscribe, drop a share, drop a comment, let me know what cases you want me to cover. It's always nice having a chat and always interesting talking about the crimes that I talk about with you. Anyway, let's get into it. Today we are looking into the case of Stephen Port. It has been 8 years since the Grindr killer, a serial killer who targeted gay men in London, began his killing spree. Although this case is now infamous, the investigation, or lack thereof, into the crimes of Stephen Port are what makes this case so insane, and one of the more reported cases that I've come across. There are podcasts, there are documentaries, there are articles. There is a BBC4 drama called 4 Lives that I watched in preparation for telling you this story, and I thought that it was going to make it easy to condense, but actually it made it pretty difficult. I've stuck all of the research that I did in the description link for you to take advantage of. I will say that if you have heard of this case before, perhaps you've heard someone else cover it. REDHANDED did a really amazing episode that I've linked in the description. Well, this is my take on bringing you that story. And if you haven't heard of it before, then strap in, because I think that's enough preamble. Almost at 6k subscribers. If I get to 10k, I know I said that I don't care about views and stuff, but I will ignore my brother in the street. That will happen, just so you know it. And let's get into this, the true crime part of this true crime channel, because this is the hobby, not gossip. Gossip is my actual job. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. Stephen Port, aka the Grindr killer, is a British serial killer who was convicted of murdering 4 men over a 15-month spree that ran from June 2014 to September 2015. By the time he got to his last victim, Jack Taylor, the police were looking, to put it kindly, a little bit useless and inept. Jack's family call his death completely avoidable, considering the circumstances in which Stephen's other victims were found, but it was on the evening of September 13th, 2015 that Jack had arranged to meet with Stephen Port. It was a meeting that he wouldn't survive. The Taylor family were horrified and grief-stricken to hear that their son, their brother, their loved one had been found dead in a church's graveyard. But that feeling quickly turned into confusion when they heard the circumstances of Jack's death. He had died from a drug overdose. Not only was he subjected to regular tests as a forklift driver, he also had dreams of joining the police force. Jack was anti-drugs, but the more the family tried to tell the police this, the less they were listened to. It was Jack's sisters who took it upon themselves to start their own investigation, and it was Jack's sisters who were ultimately dismissed by the police. Whilst it is Jack's story that brings us here, we need to go back to the beginning in order for this to make any sense. Stephen Port's first victim was called Anthony Walgate. He was from Hull and he was killed in June of 2014. Anthony was only 23 at the time of his death. He was a fashion student and a part-time escort. And it was around 4:20 in the morning of June 19th, 2014, when there was a 999 call made from a flat on Cook Street in Barking. The caller claimed to have found a young man collapsed on the street outside.
Cook Street, there's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
That caller, that man on the phone, was Stephen Port. When Stephen was asked by the police how he found Anthony's body, he just told them that he was coming home from a night shift and he saw him outside his flat. That is not what happened. A friend of Anthony's came forward and told the police that Stephen Port and Anthony had arranged to meet. They had met on an escort website called Sleepy Boys, and Stephen Port had agreed to pay Anthony £800 for the night. He insisted that Anthony's death was self-inflicted. He insisted that Anthony had voluntarily taken the party drug GHB and that he felt ill. Stephen Port went to work. He came back and Anthony was dead. He said that he panicked. This is what Stephen Port told the police. This is what the police took in, and they arrested him, charging him with perverting the course of justice. What the police didn't do was follow up on information that he volunteered during his initial interviews about suspicion of sexual assault. You're gonna hear a lot about what the police didn't do in this video. You're gonna hear a lot about police failings in this video. And I don't really like doing this. I don't like negging on a service that I would call in a heartbeat if I was in trouble or in danger. If somebody robbed me on the road, I'm gonna call 999. I would call the police. It's a service that so many people rely on, including the families of the victims. But I can't tell this story without telling you what the police didn't do. I can't tell you this story without telling you that if the concerns of family members were taken seriously, that if the crime scenes and the bodies were investigated properly, then some of these men genuinely might still be alive. Police seized Stephen Port's laptop but didn't check it for 10 months after Anthony Walgate had died. When they did search it on multiple occasions, they missed the repeated searches for drug rape videos that were on the computer. Police only searched the national database for Anthony's name and not Stephen Port's name, so they missed a previous allegation of rape against him. And we're just on victim number 1. It was on August 28th that Stephen Port would claim his second victim. 5 days earlier, Gabriel Cavari, who was only 22 years old at the time, went to stay in Stephen Port's flat. His body would be found in a graveyard 500 meters from Stephen Port's home. Gabriel was found in a sitting position against the wall of St Margaret's Church, and the scene wasn't declared as suspicious. There was no forensic search carried out at the scene, and there was no forensic post-mortem performed on Gabriel. The local police officers who were in charge of this did request that the Met Specialist Murder Investigation Team take over the investigation, but they didn't. On the 18th of September, Daniel Whitworth, who was 21, arranged to meet Stephen Port in Barking. 2 days later, his body was found in the same graveyard as Gabriel's, up against the same wall, and the same woman found both of their bodies. The same woman. I just think, Barbara, stop walking your dog. Stop it. But to think that the police didn't think, two men found in exactly the same position, in the same place, in the same graveyard, by the same church. Like, let's investigate this further, boys. Come on. Daniel had a suicide note on him. It was bizarre. It was a very strange note. It said that Daniel was responsible for the death of Gabriel and he took his own life because of guilt. The note even went as far as to say, "Don't blame the guy I was with last night." Okay. It's really hard to see the circumstances of these crimes and the demographic of these victims, young gay men, and come to a conclusion about why the police didn't investigate their murders, especially now with hindsight, knowing how the investigation wrapped up, knowing that one man was responsible for it all, and not think that the police were prejudiced. It's just like, does nobody have spidey senses? Does nobody have a feel? Does nobody have eyes to see that something's going on here? Let's fast forward to March 2015 now. Stephen Port goes to court. Oh, I'm a poet. For his perverting the course of justice charge for that 999 call back in 2014 and lying to the police. He was sentenced to 8 months in prison. He was released in June of 2015 and he was put on tag. A little bit about him. When he was just a year old, his family moved to Dagenham in East London. That's where he grew up. He lived with his parents until he was in his early 30s, and then he lived alone in the same area. And he worked as a chef. He was described as having an athletic appearance at the time of these murders. He used to go to the gym a lot. He was bald, but he disguised this publicly by wearing a blonde toupee. And he used online dating sites to lure in men. And he lied about his background. Like, on one site, he said that he was an Oxford graduate. and he served in the Navy. And then on another, he said that he was a special needs teacher. He had profiles on lots of sites, including Grindr, and that's how he got the moniker, the Grindr Killer. And like, obviously it doesn't matter what he looks like the fact that he was bald and wore a wig and posed in pictures is fine. He was just a catfish, basically. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's what I'm saying without saying it, and I should just say it. Stephen Port was a catfish, and that is how he got very young men, 25, 23, 21, to meet up with him. And I can only imagine, I haven't internet dated myself before. As somebody who uses Instagram, there are people who post certain types of pictures and then you meet them in real life and you're surprised that it's them and you're shocked and you're confused, and then you look at their profile and you think, is this you, when they're in a real life? And I can imagine that it was a bit like that when the men that Stephen Port met up with, because he didn't kill everybody that he met with on these dating sites. He definitely assaulted a lot of people though. I can imagine that you go meet him at a train station, at a bar, wherever it might be, and then this dude in the blonde wig approaches you and you think, oh shoot. This brings us to September of 2015 and back to where we began this episode with Jack Taylor. Jack's death wasn't linked to the deaths of the 3 other men, despite the fact that all 4 men's bodies were found very close to one another. They were all young men who weren't from the immediate area as well. And Jack's sisters started their own investigation. I mentioned this at the beginning, but let's talk about it a little bit more. They expressed concerns, as did the coroner in this case, that his death may in fact be linked to the others. His sisters kept their own notes, right? They identified Stephen Port's address on Cook Street. They linked all 4 of the deaths with the drug GHB and the fact that they were all found with drug bottles next to them. And the GHB thing was their biggest inspiration. I understand that he was a young guy and young people like to party and unst. If somebody is anti-drugs, they are anti-drugs, regardless of their age, regardless of where they're from, regardless of their gender or their sexuality. If they don't take drugs, they don't take drugs. Like, prejudice has many different forms, and the break in the case came when a detective, because remember all these cases are separate, so a detective who was working on the Anthony Woolgate death, he happened upon a printout of a CCTV still of Jack Taylor with a mystery man, and it was the last time that he was seen alive. And this detective recognized the mystery man in the CCTV as Stephen Port, the guy who found Anthony Woolgate's body, and that's where the link was made. And finally, on October 15th, 2015, Stephen Port was arrested on suspicion of causing the deaths of all 4 victims by administering poison. In total, 11 men were known to be victims of Stephen Port's crimes, and he was given a whole life order. And I had a look at other prisoners who are currently serving a whole life order, and it's like Levi Belfield and Peter Tobin, Michael Adebolajo, Wayne Cousins. And there you go, everything that I could squeeze into 10 minutes about Stephen Port, aka the Grindr Killer, and more importantly, his victims, Daniel Whitworth, Jack Taylor, Gabriel Cavari and Anthony Woolgate. Thank you so much for watching, and take advantage of the research links that I've put in the description, especially that episode of Red-Handed and the BBC Four Lives show, because it's heartbreaking, but it's really, really good. And yeah, we'll be back next week. I don't think that next week I'm going to be back on track. I was thinking if I could skip over some of the ones that I was going to do. I'm only like 2 weeks behind, but eventually I will have to skip over. But next week there will be a fresh, brand spanking new case for us to dive into. So thank you for watching that one. I started reading. How do I segue into this? Like, thank you for hearing that awful story. This is a great book. But yeah, I started reading How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie, who I found out, actually, that she's Greg James's wife, which doesn't mean anything to me, but what a talented family. This is so good. Okay, full disclosure, I'm about halfway through, so I'm here, right? So I'm like halfway. I started reading this last night. I forgot that I said that we were going to do this, and then when I realised I was recording today, I thought, oh my gosh, I better start reading it, and I could not put it down. It is It is really, really good. You know, you've got some books that, you know, were written recently. I feel like this book was written in the last couple of years. And, but you've got some books and they're written sort of like post-COVID, or they're written in from 2015, 2016, 2017, whatever it might be, and they try to be funny and they try to be clever, and they have these references that are super current, and it's a bit annoying. And this isn't that. This does it. I don't know how she does it, but she makes references to things that exist currently, or things that I enjoy, or, you know, things that I've heard of, I experience, and it's not cringe. So Bella Mackie, you're a bit of a G. It's about a girl called Grace, and she is on a one-stop or many-stop train to revenge, and it really, really just begins. This book begins, and then you realise that you're halfway through and you haven't slept. So yeah, so far the story is moving quickly. So far I'm enjoying all of the characters. So far we're reading a book here where I am rooting for no one, and anyone that I root for is murdered, so I'm not gonna root for them anymore, because it's just giving me Game of Thrones but in Hampstead. There's a woman, is her name Kelly? Is it Kelly? Yes, it is Kelly. And like, I think Kelly seems lovely, but the way Grace squans, Kelly needs to watch out, boy, because she's only in there for fraud, and Grace is not in there for fraud. Grace is a killer. One of the thing about thrillers that stresses me out a little bit, and I don't know if this is going to be one of them until I finish reading it, is a lot of the time the book could finish and then there's still 20 pages. So I hope that, you know, that girl on the train, that book ended and then we're now travelling with Rachel to be looking at graves, and then she's run away from priests by the seaside. Like, I don't think we needed that at the end of that book. And even, what other book was it? Was it The Anniversary? Yeah, The Anniversary, with the one with the shooting spree, and it's like the book ended, but then, you know, we're just, like, we're hearing about like somebody's life like after the day in question. So I hope that this doesn't do that. So far, I would say read it. If you like a thriller, if you like a book that moves fast paced and leaves you wanting more, give it a go. It's not too graphic in its gory detail, because obviously it is quite violent, but it is very, very, very readable. But I'm on page 160, so if you are reading this, let me know what you think of it so far, and if you love it as much as I do. Because, you know, a lot of books, they say bestseller. Like, a lot of books say bestseller, and then I think, rah, is that just because everyone wanted to see if it was good or not? But this deserves it. Anyway, I'm taking up too much of your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for rocking with me. Thank you for everything. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it does autofocus. That's good to know. I'll see you next week.